Lulich. This is the Lulich Corner, and today we get to sit down with Daniel Talbott from Talbott Business Advisory. Daniel is a business broker who helps people with buying and selling businesses, and he fits really well in with the point of our podcast, the Lulich Corner. What we try to do is we try to help bring knowledge, education, and information to you to better serve what you're looking to do, whether it be a business sale or an estate plan or a business transaction or a real estate transaction. We're looking to bring on different community and business leaders to help give you that information because knowledge is power. And so today I'm excited because a lot of people don't know much about selling a business or buying a business. So I'm excited to dive into the session today. But before we do, Daniel, if you could introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about yourself. And I appreciate you for coming on today.
Thanks so much for inviting me, Jordan. My name is Daniel Talbott. I was born and raised very close by in Vero Beach. I was actually born in Sebastian, so not too far away.
Yep.
And so I like to joke that I'm a recovering accountant. I was a tax accountant, advisory accountant for a long time, and part of my business became like fractional CFO, really helping business owners take those next steps, whether it was growing, and sometimes growth is inorganic. Sometimes it means acquiring another business. So I became a service of my firm to help my clients buy other businesses or position their business for sale. And I fell in love. I fell in love with what I was doing and the meaningful work of helping an entrepreneur grow through acquisition or exit at the right time and preserve that legacy by having the right party carry on the business, but also to free up that cash for their families. Over 90% of entrepreneurs have the majority of their wealth tied up in that business. So how we can liberate that is a very important strategy.
Well, I think those that are listening here, there's kind of like two facets of what we're talking about. One opportunity is for people who are wanting to sell businesses. And I think it's a huge misconception that people don't realize that your business, even if it's even if it's a local business, whether it be a restaurant or a little convenience store, there's value to that. And on the opposite end of it, if you're in the business of growing or even getting started in business, you can get started or you can grow your business through acquisitions and through purchasing of businesses. So I think it's a fair statement, right, Daniel, that people don't realize that they can grow or they can even get started by buying, or that there's even the opportunity to sell a business, because it pains me to see people who just put in that, closed for business sign in their walls, when they're ready to retire, and that they don't even take that step of learning about this opportunity.
That is absolutely the case, Jordan. And, it's so tragic to hear it because, we hear entrepreneurs all the time after decades in business say, you know what, I think I'm ready to slow down. And when for 90% of entrepreneurs, the majority of your wealth is the value of your business. When you say, I'm ready to slow down, that's essentially like saying, I'm going to take all of my money for retirement, everything that I have, and I'm going to put it in a losing stock. That's never a good idea.
That's not a good strategy.
Not at all.
When people are thinking about slowing down, right? So I think you just hit it on the head is, you don't want to start thinking about selling a business when you want to slow down, right? The worst thing you can do is you get sick or, you have an emergency that happens and then you want to sell your business right then and there. Like that's a strategy that you don't want to have. So Daniel, what's the best strategy as far as when is the best time to sell, or when do you start thinking about actually selling a business?
The honest answer, the best answer is really about 3 years out.
3 years, that's a long time. Well, so what makes you say 3 years?
I'd love to say 5 or 10. I love
when you start a business, you should be thinking about selling a business, right?
Yes,
but most people don't, right?
That is very true. No, most people don't. I'm going to make a little segue real quick. I think that thinking about selling your business at any stage is a great thing to do because your business's value encapsulates so many aspects of your business, from your management structure to your cash flow. It does so much in terms of measuring your business's health. So it is something you should consider at all times. Yeah. But when you're going through the process of selling a business, a potential acquirer is going to want to look back at about 3 years of historic data. So if you really want to sell for top dollar, planning to sell 3 years out, and then handling your accounting, handling your operations as if you are going to sell in 3 years will give you 3, beautiful years, a set of books that any acquirer can look at and get a real clear picture of what they're buying.
The process of selling a business is intimidating for a lot of people because when you think about selling a business and when you think about listing your business for sale, there's a lot of misconceptions around that, in that when you list your business, your employees will leave or your competition will find out and try to take opportunity of it. And so it's not as simple as going on Facebook Marketplace, right? Or going on Facebook and like advertising that your business is for sale. There's a whole intricate, very complex process that I think you could probably break it down very simplistically for us. But what does that process look like for someone who wants to sell their business and going through that process? And how do they protect themselves, their business, and their team in entering that process to sell their business?
You must have a very solid understanding of your team, your staff, and your marketplace. I've seen businesses that tell all of their staff from day one that they're going to sell as soon as they're ready to start the process. Now, I'm not saying that that's the best way to go, but I've seen it done, and they had the culture that supported that. Now, I've seen others that they keep everyone sort of in the dark up until closing day so that they can control the narrative, they can control the transition process. So when you're selling a business, it's important to work with a professional, because I'm going to be honest, it's for me, when I'm helping a business owner sell, I want to maintain that confidentiality. I want to help control how we're going to tell the market, how we're going to tell the staff. But when someone works with somebody, an advisor that maybe isn't quite as experienced, or they try to do it themselves, they may accidentally disclose key pieces of information. So something that I love to see when I'm trying to figure out what a confidential business is, I'm trying to figure out who's actually for sale, I look for the established date. Because if you have a restaurant that was established in 2008 in a small town, all you have to do is Google restaurant established 2008 small town, and you're going to find out who that is.
Right.
So it's great to work with professionals who understand the confidentiality of it. What we're going to do is we're going to go through and we're going to build that financial picture. We're going to take the history of the company. We're going to anonymize it the best that we can. And then we're going to put it out either through our private group of buyers. We have a great group of qualified buyers that we maintain that list all the time, because we always have we always have too many buyers for any business that's for sale. But then there are some great online marketplaces where you can confidentially post a business for sale to attract new interest.
One of the things that I know that people thinking about when they're buying or selling a business is, how am I going to pay for the business? Or what can I expect when I sell the business? Can I get all the money, when the day of closing? And I think that there's a lot of avenues when you go to sell a business or buy a business, and a lot of different options that you can take in trying to figure out how you're going to pay, or what type of timeline it's going to take in order for you to get paid for the sale of your business. And in a second, Daniel, I'd love to hear what's most common, but one of the things that I see a lot, I think it's becoming more frequent as a tool, is seller financing. And so for people that don't know what seller financing is when a seller is selling a business or even a piece of property, whether it be real estate. Seller financing is the ability for the seller to agree to hold a loan for the sale of that business or the sale of that property. So for example, they might sell a property for $300,000 or a business for $300,000. And a condition of the closing of the sale might say, okay, for selling my business for $300,000, I agree to loan $200,000 of that $300,000 to the buyer. And the buyer then in turn agrees to make monthly payments or quarterly payments or some type of payments, and agrees on a set plan in order to pay that $200,000 off. So I think seller financing is often an overlooked tool with business and real estate sales. But I know there's a lot of options out there. You've got SBA loans, you've got, institutional loans. And so what's the most frequent financing tool when you can't just cash pay for a business as a buyer?
Yeah, there's so many options. And when you get beyond the Main Street market, so like 0 to 5 million, 0 to 10 million, once you get into the lower middle market, then there's a lot of institutional money, there's earnouts, there's so many different structures. So to keep it simple, we'll focus on the Main Street businesses that we see most often. But before I really dive in, I want to mention, I love seller financing. Now, I love seller financing for two key reasons. As a broker, as a business advisor, I love seller financing because it tells a potential buyer or acquirer that I have confidence in this business. This business will continue, and therefore I'm going to have some skin in the game as a seller. Yeah. I'm going to stay involved. That's how confident I am in my clients, my customers, my team. So it's a great selling point.
There's some risk for the seller doing it. I mean, let's be real.
There is.
If you're seller financing, whether it be real estate or a business, and you're agreeing to loan a portion of the purchase price and have that paid back over time, then you have to have the total confidence that you're going to get repaid by that buyer for the business or for that piece of real estate. And so that's a tremendous amount of confidence. And I don't think you can fully retire, because of the uncertainty and of the unknown for that. Now, we see it done a lot, and I'm not discounting because I love the tool, but I think that there's a risk element where I see it as it's weighed as a factor. So, are you willing to sell or finance? Well, then maybe if you are, then a higher purchase price might be paid or a higher interest rate might be paid depending upon the risk and how much is being paid down.
And that's where the benefit is. So I mentioned my background is originally in tax accounting, being a tax accounting advisor. So it's all about risk versus reward. Yes, you are gambling a little bit on the new leadership. You're also, putting out there how confident you are in your business, your team, your brand that you've built. So there's so much around the actual deal itself when it comes to seller financing, but there's also a tax advantage to it. When you take that lump sum payment, you might have a very large tax bill that year because of how you took that income in one period.
Yep. To your long-term capital gains.
Right. But if you don't need it all at once, stretching that out over a couple years or even over, a 10-year period of time can really soften that tax bill. So it all depends on what you need the money for and what you're going to do with it.
When we're thinking about selling or buying a business, it really takes a team of people. Who's on that team in order to go about buying or selling a business?
I'm going to take this as an opportunity to kind of back up and then move forward, because the banker is a key component of most deals. And you mentioned the SBA. I really want to make sure that all the listeners of the podcast understand what SBA program we're talking about. The SBA 7A loan program allows for the acquisition of a small business, a Main Street business, up to $5 million. And the great thing about the program is you only have to put 10% down. And a lot of times that seller's note can offset the equity injection. So there's a number of ways that you can actually finance 100% of an acquisition. The seller's note, seller's financing is 10% or more, and it's deferred for a period of time. That could be a way. If it's an expansion loan, if you're already in business and you're buying a business of the same type, you can finance 100%. So for most Main Street deals, the banker is going to be a critical part of your deal team. Another member of your deal team is going to be your attorney. I never recommend anyone do a letter of intent, that initial offering letter, or even reviewing initial offerings you're receiving yourself. It's not something that you want to leave up to ChatGPT. You definitely want to work with a trusted advisor for all of the contracts and all the way, for all the closing documents, anything that needs to be documented. It's one of those things where if it's done right, you don't have to worry about it. But if it's done wrong and you end up in court, that's where you could really regret it.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the business broker, and buyers can bring their own broker. We have a great association for business brokers in the state of Florida. So there is the ability to have a buy-side broker that doesn't cost the buyer anything. Now, that's not the case in all states, in all cases, but it is one of the benefits of doing business in Florida.
I'd love for you to give your contact information, but really, who's the right person to reach out for you to help? Like, how does that look like? Because there's probably some people that you can bring a lot of value to, and there's probably other people where it's best they might find somebody else, a different professional. And so, what does that right client look like for you? And then how can they contact you?
I love working with community businesses, with business owners who have legacy in mind, but maybe a family member that doesn't want to take over. They don't have a clear succession plan. And, there's this real short 30-second story. Just last year, I was introduced to a business owner who had been in business for 25 years in the community, and she was planning on slowing down. She was considering a retirement sale. Mm-hmm. And the inventory on hand was about $200,000. So if you consider, discounting that for a retirement sale, about $150,000, maybe $175,000. The cash flow of the business was so good that we were able to have a buyer come in and acquire that business for almost $1 million, a $900,000 purchase price. Wow. So the perfect person for me is a business owner who they know they have some cash flow coming in. They know their business is healthy, and they don't have a clear idea of who they want to pass it on to, but they know that they want to free up that capital either for their family or for their next stage of life. I've been using this line lately that business is like playing chess, but sometimes the most valuable move is off the board.
There you go. And Daniel, how can people reach out to you if they want to hear more and ask you more?
Yes, you can find me at on my website, talbotadvisorygroup.com, or you can look me up, Daniel Talbott, Talbott on LinkedIn, or give me a call, 772-242-0002.
All right. Well, appreciate you joining in. Thanks for listening in. This is the Lulich Corner, and we'll see you next time.